This is the most popular car on sale today in Europe, the Dacia Sandero. This is the most popular car on sale in the United States, a Ford F-Series pickup. In fact, Americans love big cars so much that out of the top 10 best-selling cars, 8 aren't even cars. But why exactly is this a unique American issue? Why are Americans obsessed with size? And why might this big car addiction be killing them?
At an alarming rate.
Supersize me.
Sure, what would you like?
I don't care. Just supersize me.
These days, it's hard to look out of your window without seeing megatrucks of every size, shape, and color. Walk through any car park in America, and you'll see SUVs and pickups making up over half of the vehicles that you pass. But this boom in big cars didn't happen overnight. In fact, it didn't start to happen until the 1970s.
Those long gasoline lines will probably be with us for the rest of the summer, and the price at the pumps will keep on getting higher.
Between 1967 and 1979, the world went through a major crisis. A crisis that revolved around one of Earth's most precious materials: oil. This thick, dark liquid is the result of millions of years of activity. Activity started from dead organisms like algae and zooplankton. This oil, known in this form as crude oil, goes through a process before it becomes useful. Not to get too technical, but this oil is heated until it separates. Some of the products of that separation you use every day. Gasoline, diesel, solvents, and the asphalt on roads come from it. But it's the first two that are important for our story. Back in 1973, Arab nations, the controllers of large amounts of the world's crude oil, placed an embargo on its production. This embargo, a way to control the flow of goods, restricted the amount of oil these countries would export. Even for countries with their own oil, like America, this restriction reduced supply. Just like you saw with the Prime energy drink, less product means more exclusivity. Exclusivity means more competition for each bottle. More competition means more cost. The same thing happened with oil, the raw material for petrol. Things got so bad in Europe that the UK government was on the verge of rationing, just like they did in World War II. This was truly a global crisis. So how does this relate to Americans owning big cars, I hear you ask? Well, it was the domino that started America's addiction to the SUV. With gas prices at an all-time high and queues at every pump around the country, lawmakers needed to act fast. And they did this with new regulations. Cars needed to become more efficient, more economical. You can see this clearly if you take a look at the power figures of an American icon, the Ford Mustang. First generation models from the 60s had massive V8s. Gas mileage was an afterthought. It was all about power and the thrill of driving. The second generation, in 1974, came with a 2.3-litre 4-cylinder. They made a V8 too, but it had the numbers of a 4-cylinder. This was all to satisfy the new regulations. And by 1985, new cars in America needed to get 27.5 miles per gallon. The 1969 Ford Mustang had a combined average miles per gallon of 12.7. New cars had to do over double that figure. But you know what vehicles didn't need to achieve them? Commercial ones. You see, the law focused on passenger cars. Cars built for, well, passengers. What it did not cover was vehicles made for work, like a pickup truck. These working vehicles could not be hit with the same regulations. Why? Well, because they are the backbone of America, used by farmers, construction workers, and freight companies. Without them, Americans would starve. Lawmakers couldn't give them a free pass, so they made a second category called light trucks. These trucks had a lower target of 21 miles per gallon. You can probably tell what that means for the US car market. Automakers were now, whether intentional or not, incentivized to make trucks. After all, regulations strangle profit, so if there is a loophole, it will be found. Automakers started taking the commercial vehicles and making them plush. They fitted nicer seats, stereos, air conditioning. They made it feel like a passenger car. This new class would become known as the sports utility vehicle, or SUV for short. The lower regulations and straightforward construction made the SUV more profitable. Take a truck base, slap a car on top, and it was literally that simple. Take the Chevrolet Blazer. It used the same frame as the S10 truck. They put a new body on this old frame and bingo, a new SUV with lower regulations and higher profits. Jeep would approach it in another way. They built their Cherokee as a unibody, an all-in-one design. This style has grown in popularity. Crossovers made up just 4% of new car sales in the year 2000, but by 2018, they had grown enormously to make up 40% of new car sales, a 10x increase in 18 years. This boom was propelled by major models like the Cherokee, Toyota's RAV4, and the Ford Explorer. The crossover bug has even replaced well-loved models in major lineups. It caused such a wave that even some of the biggest names in Europe, like Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche, all now make SUVs. If you take a look at this graph, you can see the domino effect of regulations. Year on year, passenger car sales fell as SUV and truck sales increased. Even modern regulation changes didn't halt this growth. Rules became based on the vehicle's footprint, its height, its width. The bigger the car, the lower the standard. So having smaller, family cars became hard for automakers. This meant more R&D and less profit. The solution? Make every car bigger. But this comes with its own trade-offs. Not just in efficiency. A brick on wheels isn't very drag efficient, but also in injury, and more often than not, death.
A bicyclist was killed by an out-of-control SUV.
Prosecutors say Schwally's 5,000-pound Chevy Traverse turned into a weapon at that point.
4 teenagers and a 12-year-old allegedly stole an SUV.
Headlines like this are more common today than 30 years ago, with some studies even saying SUVs have caused more deaths than passenger cars would, as many as 1,000 additional casualties. This makes sense when an SUV hits you like a linebacker, where a passenger car hits you like the kicker. All jokes aside, there is science to back this up. This is Isaac Newton, a fairly intelligent gentleman. One day, he was hit by an apple that had fallen from a tree. This apple, weighing around 102 grams, was sped up by something that increased the force it generated, right before hitting Newton's dome: gravity. From this, we get newtons, a way of measuring the force of objects like cars. This is a Toyota Camry, America's best-selling car, and it weighs 3,231 pounds. This is a Ford F-150 Super Duty, and it weighs 4,465 pounds bone dry. If you accelerate the Camry to 70 miles per hour, it creates a force of 46,000 newtons. To put that into perspective, this is a T-Rex, and its bite force is estimated to be between 34,000 and 63,500 newtons. Getting hit by a Camry at 70 miles an hour is the equivalent to being chewed up by a T-Rex. The F-150, at the same speed, creates a force of 63,350 newtons. That's like being chewed up by the same T-Rex, spat out, and then being immediately chomped down on by a crocodile. Now granted, if you're hit by anything at 70 miles an hour, you're going to be in a bad way. But this force translates to the metal boxes we sit in every day. Sure, they have crumple zones and airbags to help, but a whole crocodile's worth of extra force is going to hurt. In fact, if you're hit by an SUV, you are 3 times more likely to die. And it doesn't end there. SUV drivers are less likely to die in crashes with passenger cars, but the occupants of the passenger car are more likely to die. The same happens as before. Big hits harder than small every time. Car makers understand that these facts cause fear in their audience. So what can they do to combat this? Well, they make adverts around how safe their cars are. Of course, fight the negatives by promoting the positives. However, it needs to be spun. Take the high driving position. That's a benefit, right? You can see more, you are further away from danger, and all the rest. Well, let's introduce 18 children into the equation, just like this study did. They placed 18 kids in front of an SUV and asked the owner to sit inside. He couldn't see any of them. That's not surprising. Look at the front of a Cadillac Escalade. It looks more like a train than a car. Take this GMC Yukon AJ stood next to. That hood must be a good 6.5 feet off the floor. 70% of women in America are shorter than that front end. That is your girlfriend, your grandma, your daughter, your niece, A driver in a large SUV like this won't see any of them. A truck driver cannot see anything within 25 feet of their front end. If you say an SUV is less than half the height of a truck, that is a good 10 feet or 3 meters of blind spot. Back to some scary car crash stats. People in smaller vehicles are 10 times more likely to die when involved in a crash with an SUV than another type of car. SUV drivers are also maniacs. Don't take my word for it. Here's Mark Rober. In an experiment to see if people would kill rubber animals, Mark placed a spider, a snake, and a turtle at the side of the road. Oh, and a leaf, because, well, science. And look at that. Nearly 90% of all of the animal killers drove SUVs unlike trucks. Now, I love a Trackhawk as much as the next guy, but if I had a choice between the safety of my family and driving it, I wouldn't drive it. The government has started to see the problem too, and maybe they'll fix it. Who knows? America's addiction to big cars isn't my fault, and it isn't your fault. It's not your local grocery store owner's fault, or the guys down at 7-Eleven. Government regulations and capitalist car makers, nudged by oil greed, led America towards a deadly addiction to large cars that shows no signs of stopping, unlike this video. But don't worry, the YouTube overlords who have access to your search history think that this video is something that you will really enjoy, so why not go and check it out?